Well, hello, folks. In this introductory session of economics, I shall try to offer you an understanding of economics and walk you through its application and relevance in real life and the understanding of the role and interaction of various entities and stakeholders within the economy. So, this introductory session should be able to make you understand what economics in general is, how does it relate to our day to day lives, and what is the role that different stakeholders, right, from individuals at micro level, from individuals, producers to groups at macro level, and even firms, industry, and government play, and the kind of interaction they have with one another in an economic setup. So the next several minutes, I'll be taking you through this understanding with the help of a presentation. So in this opening vignette, before formally addressing what economics is, let me walk you through a basic life example, a real economic scenario, and give you the building blocks for understanding this particular subject. And it would address questions like the importance and relevance of economics, why do we study it, how does it help, and what are the roles and goals of different stakeholders who study and apply this in their day-to-day lives. So before coming to it, let's first understand a real world situation and understand why do we do what we do. So economics, when we study it, it answers this first question of why do people, organizations, and governments do what they do. Obviously, there is something that drives them to do it. And if you understand the entire mechanism that drives people to behave the way they behave, you would actually start understanding what economics is all about. So, economics is basically the whole science or whole, I would say, the discipline that talks about what all rational premise people hold before taking certain decisions in order to improve their future. And in that process, individuals at micro level, when they work together in groups and at macro level form organizations, industries, societies, and governments, they play certain roles for their individual and mutual benefits of people at large. And that's where economics comes into play. So the first question that we'll address today is why do we what we do? And then we will talk about how economics comes into play. So you all know that the quest of every human behavior is the quest for satisfaction. Now, it's a very abstract term that I'm using. People can be performing different activities in order to earn money, in order to buy goods and services, to satisfy themselves, to build a career, to earn a status or a reputation. If I try to collect everything into one and all the materialistic and the non-materialistic goals of life into a single word, we may say that the ultimate quest is satisfaction. Now, for satisfaction, when I talk about satisfaction, there could be materialistic needs and non-materialistic needs. So we combine them together into satisfaction, and we say that satisfaction is derived when certain needs, wants, or even aspirations or desires are met. So people work towards fulfillment of certain needs, wants, and desires, which gives them satisfaction. Now, in order to satisfy these needs and wants, obviously we are talking about a materialistic society. However, if you talk in terms of spirituality, people may not provide enough importance to goods and services in order to attain the ultimate satisfaction. But we are here talking about a world wherein people have materialistic needs or unmaterialistic, non-materialistic desires being met through, again, certain goods and services. So goods and services are the primary source of satisfying our material and non-material needs, wants, and desires, and giving us satisfaction. Now, in order to procure these goods and services, you need certain resources. I won't directly call it money, I would call it resources. And resources can include a whole lot of things, from money, obviously a creation of mankind, or you require wealth, you require land, you require human resources, you require capital, you require so many things. So all those time, efforts, money, um, hard and soft capital, all these would be a component of resources. So money, wealth, land, labor, capital, all these would be resources. So now let's understand this whole process. People are in a quest for satisfaction, and for that, they try to generate certain resources, or they try to utilize the resources at hand in order to procure goods and services. And by procuring those goods and services, they try to fulfill their needs, wants, and desires. And this ultimately gives them a feeling of satisfaction. So we would normally call this the act of consumption. So we all understand that if we leave aside the scarcity problem for the time being of resources, if we have unlimited amount of resources with us in terms of money, time, resources, energy, and so on and so forth, we would simply be investing the entire life in the process of consumption. We would be procuring goods and services which are available. We would do whatever we wish to do, and would actually, attain satisfaction the way we assume we would be able to get the best out of it. So if we are involved in the whole process of consumption, the first problem that arises is that we are exhausting our resources. You buy goods and services, there's nothing comes as a free lunch, so obviously you've got to pay in some form or the other. Now understand one thing, you are not just paying in terms of money, you're paying in terms of time, you're paying in terms of energy, you're paying in terms of a cost which is either monetary or non-monetary in nature. If I give you a free movie ticket and I tell you to go and watch it, certainly the movie might be free. You might spend some money going and traveling, or spend some money on the petrol that you fill in your car or vehicle to reach the cinema hall. But you are, besides this, spending your time and energy, and that time and energy could have been utilized in doing something else. So even if it is free on monetary terms, there is a cost involved in the whole process. So somewhere or the other, you are exhausting your resources. You're exhausting your time, you're exhausting your energy, you're exhausting your wealth. Let's take an example. We have a limited life. We don't know how many years we're going to live. But the fact here is that every single day we are losing out on time. We are growing of age, and we are losing out on time. Similarly, and that's the reason why we have a deadline attached to everything, we have a timeline attached to everything, right? We can't just be thinking of studying all our life, because there's a time when you also have to start earning. So learning might be a continual process, but education, certainly a formal education, might stop at a while, after a while, and you would look for a job. And then after a job, you would probably look for a time frame when you work, and then you think of a retired life where you do something else and enjoy your time. Because you know your energy, your health, your memory, your capacity, your physical abilities, your psychomotor skills, all these would have certain limitations over a period of time. And so is money, right? You just can't, thoughtlessly or carelessly just keep buying goods and services, because you know you have limited resources, and these resources will exhaust if you keep spending them. So that's the first problem. The first problem is that we have unlimited and ever growing, ever changing, and everlasting needs, wants, and desires. Now, there's a difference. Needs are the basic needs, obviously. If I go by the basics, we say that the basic drives for like the air to breathe, the water to drink, and the other basic drives of life as a human being are the basic needs for survival. So if I further kind of categorize them, you say, so food, clothing, and shelter, security could be, the basic needs of life. But this need grows into wants, and wants grow into desires, with obviously introduction of scientific technological developments and new products and services, with growth of aspirations. So need may be a need for shelter, but a want may convert it into a good house, and a desire may be as big as buying a house or a flat in Manhattan. So the needs, wants, and desires are ever growing. They keep growing. You satisfy one need, and you know another need comes over. So they're ever changing, and at the same time, they do not die forever. You drink a glass of water, you may quench your thirst, and you may start feeling that you're hungry. Once you eat some food, you might realize that you wanted to catch some sleep, you were tired. After you get up, you realize you're a social animal. You need friends and company and people to talk to, and you might go out enjoying the nature. But then again, by the evening, you might fall hungry and thirsty. So the idea here is to understand that these needs, wants, and desires are not only ever changing, they are ever growing, and they're everlasting. So there are unlimited wants and desires. And the way the scientific technology and development is happening, the way new products and services are arriving, new innovations are happening, these wants are further growing into an unlimited sort of level. And same way, if we talk about our resources, the resources on the contrary are limited. Now, what resources are we talking about? You might say that, well, a lot of people who are rich may not have a dearth of resources, which is not true. All I say is that even the richest man on planet might have the capacity to buy any good or a service which can be bought for money, but then he may not be able to buy everything. So the point here is you may have the money to buy the costliest product, but you may not have the capacity to buy everything that exists on the planet. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that there's so many things which you cannot still afford to buy, and you have dearth of resources in terms of money, wealth, in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of capacities, and so the resources keep getting exhausted over a period of time. For example, if we spend 3 years on education or going for a master's degree in, let's say, business administration for 2 years, we are bound to spend some money in terms of the investment into the program, paying a certain course fee, our living expenses, our other expenses on external training and development that we spend money on. Then we are spending our 2 golden years of life, and then at the same time we are spending some energy and resources, and also the most crucial time wherein we could have done so many other things in life. So when you sacrifice your present, right, you are exhausting your resources, though with an assumption that you are going to get something in return in future. But the point here is, in this process of consumption, you are exhausting your resources. Your resources are depleting, and you're getting goods and services which are increasing your satisfaction. Now, the problem that you see here is that this continual activity of consumption cannot sustain forever, for a simple reason that a day would come when you will fall short of resources. You may fall short of wealth or money, or if not money and wealth, you might fall short of energy and physical abilities, and if not that, might lose out on time for some reason. So as we grow, as we say that sometimes you don't have money, but you have enough time and enough energy with you. As you grow further up, you have you start earning money, so the money starts increasing. You have less of time because you're very busy working and you have a lot of energy. And when you grow old, you might lose out. You may have enough time, you may have enough money, but you may not have enough energy. So what we are doing, we're simply in the process of juggling between our resources. We are paying something that we have in excess to get something we don't, and in future we again kind of barter that for something that we now have in scarcity and we want it more. So things that we have, we kind of barter them for something we don't, and this becomes a cyclical process. But anyway, let's leave the philosophy aside. So the idea here is you're paying money to get something, and let's say, for example, you earn a lot of money, and you earn a lot of money to buy yourself a good life, and tomorrow you might pay that money to get yourself, God forbid, maybe a heart surgery or something in order to live a few more years. So initially we were bartering our time to earn money, and in the long run we might barter money for getting some more time, some more health, and some more that extra years to live and enjoy with our family. So that's how it goes, and resources definitely may deplete in some form or the other. It's just that those resources are not just money, it is time, efforts, money, wealth, and so on and so forth. Now, since the problem is that these resources will exhaust, we need to generate these resources. If we want to keep continuing the process of consumption, to keep enjoying our life, to keep getting satisfaction, whether it is in form of our needs and wants being met, whether materialistic or non-material, we need to create some resources, because we don't have unlimited resources with us. So in order to generate these resources, primarily, definitely in economics, we talk about money and wealth, because with that money and wealth, you're going to buy time, you're going to buy energy. Today, when you're young, you go home during vacations, you might go travel through a train journey. And in order to save money, because to you, you have enough time, but money is important, a resource for you. Tomorrow, when you get into your own businesses and into the jobs and you get well paid, your time is so crucial that you might spend money on buying a flight ticket and in order to save that time, because your time would be more important than money at that point in time. When we grow old, we may have enough time in terms of nothing to do. And so we may have a different perspective. So the point here is that resources need to be generated in order to continue getting the supply of those goods and services in order to satisfy our needs and wants, which will be growing in future for the next new range of cars, for the new range of consumption goods that might emerge over a period of time, and in order to continue satisfying ourselves. Now, in order to generate these resources, what do we do? So in order to generate these resources also, we would have to involve into an activity where either we produce goods and services and offer them, or we become a component or maybe a factor of production and assist in the process of creation of some goods and services which people might be willing to buy. And in return, we'll be able to earn the money and the wealth or the return on our investments, by which we'll continue satisfying our needs and wants. So it's like if I come to a university to teach, I'm spending money on the car fuel, on my wardrobe, on buying a laptop, on buying resources and books, and in the whole process, when I'm gaining this knowledge and I'm going home, I'm spending, money on food. I'm spending money on buying education for my kids. I'm spending money on a holiday for my family, and also the savings and investments for future. How am I doing that? So when I'm doing this, I'm coming to the university and contributing in the process of education, in the process of creation of knowledge and delivery and dissemination of knowledge, and I get a salary out of it. So that salary is the resource that I'm getting in return for assisting in the process of design and delivery of knowledge, and that's what is the offering as a good and service to the society. So you pay a fee for this, that becomes our income, we generate that income, and then we go ahead and spend that money in buying other goods and services that we need, or buying education from schools for our children, and so on and so forth. So now on the other side, the flip side is that the people, the individual who was spending his resources in the process of consumption now has to contribute in the process of creation of goods and services, or production of goods and services, or in any other form of investment wherein he is able to generate more resources. So now the words that come here and explaining the whole activity is people will be involved in the process of either investments, that if you have money, you put it in the bank and generate some interest out of it. If you have a piece of land, which is again a resource or a wealth, you give it on rent or for some productive use and get rent in return, which is again an investment. Or you utilize your time going working somewhere, you give your services as a labor or as a manager, or labor is a generic term, and you get some wages and salary out of it. Or you start your own business and you become an organizer or a manager, and you organize all the factors of production together and earn profits or return on investments. So investment is one way where you directly try to earn some returns by involving the process of production or distribution. Distribution is another activity wherein you, rather than producing goods and services, involve yourself in the process of trade, buying products from one place and selling them at the other, where you can, it can fetch you a higher price. So all these kind of activities are the other side of consumption, wherein you are trying to generate more resources. So when you produce these goods and services or contribute in the production of these goods and services, the organization earns the profit, and the factors of production who are involved, like the land, labor, and capital suppliers, they get their wages, salaries, interest, and profits as a return on their investments. And with this money, each of those stakeholders or people who are working either alone as individuals or in organizations, they generate resources and they continue their process of consumption. So as a human, as an individual, you see that people on one hand are spending resources, right, in order to consume goods and services for satisfaction. And on the other hand, they are again investing their resources, whether time, efforts, money, or land or capital, in order to either produce directly or contribute in the production of goods and services, and generate those resources further so that they can further continue their process of consumption. So it's in simple terms, if we see, it's the consumption, it's the need satisfaction that people have that drives the production. So consumption necessitates production. We want to consume goods and services. We are hungry, we need food. So it's the hunger, it's the food, or it's the hunger for food that drives the process of production of food. And that's where cultivation, cropping by farmers becomes a productive activity. If all of us had no dearth of resources and we had free supply of food, nobody would have entered into the profession of farming or into the occupation of being a farmer. Similarly, if everybody had the knowledge and there was no scarcity of it and people had all the resources and time, they wouldn't go probably to universities and institutions to get knowledge from somebody else, and there wouldn't have been teachers and professors. So the idea here is that since there is a scarcity, there is a limitation, and that's what we said, limitation of resources, knowledge, or capital, or whatever, people actually look for those from the other people who have them in excess. So there's a mutual coincidence of wants. People expect something from the others, and in exchange, either pay them something else or at least money, and that's how people get salaries, wages, interest, or rent on their investments. Another interesting thing is that the resources that we use, and that's even more serious a problem, when we consume, we know that we have limited resources. So we have certain amount of money. If I keep spending that at the rate at which I'm spending, and I say that I add on the inflation rates to it, and then the new technology would come over. So I might have more demand and more products to buy. I can probably anticipate how many years will I be able to continue and sustain with the available resources I have. But another problem is that every resource that I spend on a particular commodity or a service, I may have so many alternatives. So if you have 10 rupees in your pocket and you go to the canteen, you might have products which are well below 10 rupees, and you might have a lot of options available to you. So obviously for 10 rupees, you may not be able to buy something which is comes at a price of 100 rupees. But then for those 10 rupees, you can buy something which comes for rupees 5 or rupees 2 or rupees 7. So you might have, maybe a hypothetical case, if a small bottle of cold drink is for 5 rupees and a patty come for 5 rupees, you might combine the two and have it. Or you might go for something which is straight away costing you 10 rupees, maybe a glass of fresh juice, or you might buy something else. Another interesting thing is that when you know that you have this dearth of resources, as I said, you might try to optimize your consumption, right? And that's where the challenge increases. Not only limited resources is a problem, alternate uses is also a problem, because it not only gives you freedom, it creates confusion. So if you buy something, let's say you have five items that come for 5 rupees, and you buy a cold drink and a patty, then you're not only spending 5 rupees, you have at the back of your mind that you have not been able to have a pastry. So you had to trade off. And trade off means you had to sacrifice something in order to get something in return. So when you have alternate options, you spend your resources on one particular thing, you are losing an opportunity to spend that money on something else. So when you take economic decisions, we not only look at the accounting cost or the money that we are spending, but also that opportunity that we are losing when we are spending our resources on something. And that opportunity cost is dependent on alternate uses. The next best alternative which we had but we could not avail becomes our opportunity cost. I give you an example. Even if I give you a free movie ticket, and let's say you completely do not have to spend anything on that movie, and you go there, you might have saved, let's say 300 rupees, which a ticket might have costed you. But then there might be certain other accounting expenses you end up doing. One is you go there and you have a pack of popcorn during the break, or maybe you spend some money on the parking and on the fuel. But even if you don't do that, the time of those 2 or 3 hours that you spend, you might have utilized in the next best activity you could have done. What is that? To some, the next best activity could have been playing a match of football. For some, it could have been playing on the mobile phone or playing a video game. For some, it could have been going to the library and studying for exams. So whatever the assuming that you have taken the most optimal decision, the best decision that gives you highest level of satisfaction, the second best alternative that you sacrificed becomes an opportunity cost. So you also have to ensure that for every action that you take, you are not only spending your resources wisely because you have limited resources, so you got to think before you spend them, but you also have to ensure that you put it in the most optimal activity because there are so many alternatives available to you. And that's why humans, when they consume or when we spend our day-to-day life in consumption, even then we have to rationally and logically keep thinking of all these factors. And that's why even consumption is not an easy decision. So when you go to a shop and you get confused with so many products available, when you look at a sale, you might get, kind of attracted towards buying goods. And that's where you have to rationally think what to do. When you go to McDonald's, many of you who understand the importance of money might see that if I want to have a burger, if I want to have a cold drink, let me look at an economy meal and see if I end up saving something if I go for a combo or something. So these kind of calculations, when we do, it shows that rationally we are trying to, take a decision that gives us the maximum satisfaction at probably the lowest possible expense, and that's what we call as an optimal decision. Among given the available resources, what is the best we can do out of them? Similarly, we talked about production and investment. Even in production and investment, you are parting away from your resources. So the resources are again depleting there. It's not that, when you invest in a business, you might invest some money or capital or some time or some energy. If you do a business, you could have done a job. So what you earn in a business should also include the opportunity cost of your time, which you could have, and money that you could have earned if you did a job somewhere. So all these accounting and non-accounting opportunity cost, as we call them, combined together are termed as economic cost. And you have to ensure that when you take decisions, whether in consumption or production, you are covering up this opportunity cost and you're earning profits over and above. So when you earn profits and satisfaction over and above your opportunity cost, we may say that you have ended up being more efficient. And that's where, in economic terms, we call it economic profits. So if I invest 5 rupees and earn 10 rupees, my accounting profit may be rupees 5. But if the opportunity cost of those 5 rupees that I invested in this business, had I invested somewhere else, I would have been able to earn, let's say, 7 rupees out of it. Then I would make sure that that 7 rupees, if I deduct out of the 10 that I have earned as a revenue, my economic profit is just rupees 3 instead of rupees 5. So that's what relative efficiency is all about. We'll be talking about all these topics in great detail during the course of this course of managerial economics. But it's just to give you an overview about a lot of things. So now when you're investing your money, you're trying to ensure that you get the maximum possible returns out of it in terms of, again, what? People who contribute in production, like, they don't become producers, but they work for an organization. They can earn rents for their land that they have contributed. They can earn salaries and wages for the time they give and the knowledge and skills they give to the organization. They can charge for their consultancies, and similarly, they can earn interest for the capital that they are offering, and so on and so forth. And the owner, or probably the entrepreneur, who takes the risk of bringing them all together, running an organization, can earn an additional surplus, which is called the profit. So this is how, by making these goods and services available to the society, we are able to generate resources for ourselves, and those resources get distributed amongst, again, those individuals who were involved in the business, and each individual further spends that money into the process of consumption. So each one of us play two roles in general, one as a consumer and the other as a producer, or you may call it as an investor or a distributor, but we are in the process of generating those resources. Now, if I try to sum up the whole thing, the roles that we are playing in our day-to-day lives, as a producer on one hand, as a consumer on one hand, like I told you, if I come to the university, if I'm not the producer, I'm not the man who owns the university or runs, who's the founder of the university, or I'm not the man who runs the business. I am a factor of production. So the faculty is the different people who work for an organization are stakeholders or are members of or factors of production. So each one of them are contributing in the process of production. So either you become a producer or you become a factor of production, which is land, labor, or capital, or organizer or manager or an entrepreneur. And in return, you get those resources. So in both these roles that we play, we are dealing with certain problems. In economics, we call them problems, and economics itself is the whole domain or discipline that helps us train ourselves and understand the art of dealing with these problems and taking optimal decisions. And that's why decision science involves predominantly the involvement of economics along with some econometric and mathematical tools. So dealing with this problem of scarcity is the first problem. The first problem that we all live up with is the problem of scarcity. We have scarcity of money or wealth, and along with that, other resources like time, efforts, energy, and so on and so forth. And so, because the resources are scarce, we have to take decisions wisely and optimally. For every rupee that we spend, we have to think before spending. The second is there is a problem of choice, because there's an old saying that I would stretch my legs to the extent I have the size of the bed sheet. But the point here is that if you have limited resources, one option could have been to limit all your aspirations, needs, wants, and desires within that limitation. That I would only live this kind of life because I have this much of resources. But at the same time, there are so many alternatives and choices you have. So you have to pick amongst those choices. And that's the second challenge people face. Which of the alternatives should I pick, even if I can afford uh, each of them? I can't afford all of them, but I can afford each one of them individually. Which is the one I should pick up? Which is the one I should forego or leave for the time being? So that's also a challenge. It's a decision that you have to take as to which of the alternatives should you pick up. And when you think of this, you see that which of these alternatives is going to be the most suitable and the beneficial, giving you the maximum return or satisfaction. And when you eliminate the others, there's an element of sacrifice. And that sacrifice has been termed as the opportunity cost. That means the resource that you have spent or the resource that you have invested in a particular alternative, and having done away with the other alternative or the next best alternatives, you have to factor that sacrifice as an opportunity cost, so that you always have at the back of your mind that there is something you have lost in order to gain something. And that increases the importance, the seriousness of the action that you take. So that's where you become serious. So if you start thinking about the opportunity cost of not only the money that your parents have invested on your education, the time, those 2 golden years that you're going to spend on an MBA, and all that fun and the beauty of life you're going to lose over those 2 years. And obviously, your age is growing. You won't have those 2 years coming back to you. How can you best optimally utilize your 2 years of tenure into education in such a way that you get enough out of it in terms of knowledge, confidence, and strength to be into a good profession and execute a business successfully, that you will be able to get greater returns which are over and above the sacrifice that you have done for these 2 years. So you might sacrifice, as an analogy, you might sacrifice a visit to Missouri when there is a snowfall and invest that time on studying in the library or doing well in the academics. And once you get into a good profession, you start earning lucrative income out of it, or you get into your own business and earn well out of it. You might compensate that loss of visit to Missouri by probably going to a hill station or maybe going to Switzerland and spending a week holiday along with your family out there. So that's when you feel that you have optimally utilized your resources and covered up the opportunity cost of that you had involved in the whole process. So now, having said this, these are the three basic problems that you deal with: problem of scarcity, the problem of choice, and dealing with opportunity cost. Another problem you're facing as a producer or as an investor is, even in consumption, where to allocate your resources. So amongst those alternatives that I have in consumption and also in the process of investment or production, where should I allocate my resources? For example, if you want to invest some money, where should I do it? Should I invest this money in the bank? Should I go for a fixed deposit? Should I invest this money on buying some gold? Should I invest this money on buying some stocks? Should I start my own business? Or should I do something else? So there are so many alternatives. And amongst those alternatives, you again have to take a logical decision based on obviously intuition, based on your knowledge, based on your wisdom, and based on some rationality, which economics obviously teaches. And we'll study those principles of decision making and the factors that go into decision making and identifying and evaluating alternatives. So based on those, you would take the best course of action. And when you take this best course of action, you are solving the problem of rationally allocating your resource, that is your time or your money or your efforts, into one particular area. And then you try to extract the maximum advantage out of it, which is called the optimum utilization of resources. So based on your limitations, based on your strengths, based on your capacity, based on your knowledge and understanding, you would try to put your resources into something, into an activity which gives you the maximum, or optimal rather, optimal returns out of it. So in economics, optimal plays a more important role than maximum. There are certain places where maximum will be an important word. Maximum welfare is great, but maximum profit may not be a great idea. Optimum profit, which means that sometimes maximum production is not a great idea, but optimal production means the point where you are able to produce at the most efficient levels and still have the highest possible output. So many a times, max optimum is more, suitable a terminology in economics than the term maximum, right? So that's what it is. Like, we cannot judge the success of an individual by looking at how much money that he has earned alone. We also have to see that probably, like, maximum marks in the class is not a justification alone of the best performance. You might also see that people, what was the average percentage or levels at which they started, and how much have they performed now at the end of the semester. And you might see a relative performance of different individuals. And you might see that somebody who scored maybe 70% is somebody who had very average scoring in the past, while somebody who was always a topper with 70, 80% marks ends up scoring a 90. There's no doubt that 90 is the maximum performance, but the optimal performance has been shown, probably a kind of relative performance, by the one who has shown tremendous improvement. Similarly, success alone cannot be judged by where people have reached. It also has to be relative from what all did they have with them. So if somebody who was deprived of resources is able to do well, can also be an optimal performance, even if he is, in terms of the maximum performance, not done the best compared to others. This is just a philosophical statement, but you would understand this in greater detail when we talk about production, cost, and revenue and profits, where you'll understand concepts where maximum and optimal will be more understandable in clear terms. So as of now, we would just say that these are the problems that economics addresses. This is kind of role that individuals or people play in the society. They are involved in the activities of consumption and production, and consumption necessitates production and investments, and production facilitates consumption. So it's a cyclical trend. Consumption facilitates, necessitates production, and production facilitates consumption. So they are kind of complementary to each other, and that's how the wheel of the economy keeps moving. Now, if I fit this role that I just talked about of an individual as a producer and a consumer, we can fit it into a larger economic setup, and that's where we understand the concept of the circular flow model in an economy. So what happens is that when you produce these goods and services, or you become a part of an organization or a business that produces these goods and services, you're offering these to a certain set of people in the society, in the market, or in the economy, which you call as your customers and stakeholders. And these people in the market are also, on the other hand, producing something or the other by which they are earning resources and paying for these goods and services. On the other hand, when you become a consumer and you buy goods and services, you're dependent on this market or the society or the economy to give you those goods and services which you do not have. So it's a give and take process, and each individual becomes a part of the larger setup of the macroeconomy, and wherein he either looks up to the economy for certain goods and services and offers some goods and services to the economy in return. So that's how we see the circular setup of an economy in more clear terms. So each individual in economics is generally addressed as a consumer. So we as families, we as households are generally involved in the activity of consumption. That's what economics says. And on the other hand, when we as individuals or collectively as a group involve ourselves in the activity of production of goods and services, we behave like a producer, and it's the firms that involve themselves in the production of goods and services. So certainly the same individuals who are in the households would also be performing for the firms, but firm is taken as a separate entity where individuals, in a organized setup, are producing certain goods and services and offering them to people and households. So for the timing, let's simplify this. Firms and households are two entities or stakeholders of the economy. And firms, which have a separate entity than the individuals working for it, so firm is a different entity, firms produce goods and services and offer them for consumption to the households. And that's how the households also, on the other hand, that is those people, those individuals, go to these organizations not only as consumers but also as factors of production. As I said, one of those people might be the owner of the firm, so he might be the organizer or the manager or the entrepreneur, and in return, when he runs the firm and supplies goods and services, he might be earning certain profits out of it. Similarly, some people who cannot do their own business might be working under some organization. They might be giving their professional services as doctors, engineers, lawyers, policemen, teachers, or so on and so forth. And so they are providers of labor services, and they earn wages and salaries out of it. Similarly, if people have capital, they have land, they have machinery, infrastructure, they can rent it out, and that's a factor service you offer to a particular firm. So the same individuals are consumers and they are primarily treated as households. But when they provide goods and services, they provide factor services to the firms. They are collectively termed as firms, which are consuming the factor services and producing goods and services. So remember, households are also primarily consuming. They are consuming goods and services, and they are offering factor services. The firms, on the other hand, are offering goods and services and consuming factor services. So just like the individuals I talked about are playing two different roles, even the firms play two different roles. The firms earn money out of the goods and services they offer, and they pay money for the factor services they earn. But primarily in economics, we treat households as the consumers and firms as the producers. Now, what happens is there is always a two-way flow to every activity. The reason I said this is if households were only consuming, they would exhaust their resources and they'll stop consumption. And firms will no more be able to produce goods and services and sell them because number one, there won't be any demand. And number two, there won't be any factor services coming further up to them. So both these entities are on one hand consumers and on the other hand producers. But because of their primary role that they play, we treat households as consumers and firms as producers. Now, as households consume goods and services, they pay for these goods and services to the firms, and that's how the firms earn their resources and generate their resources. On the other hand, the households who provide factor services like land, labor, and capital services to firms also get paid for their factor payments. So if you look at the previous example slide that I talked about, the households are when they are providing factor services to the firms and earning factor payments, they are acting as producers of factors of production. And on the other hand, when the same households are buying goods and services from the firms and paying for those goods and services, they are primarily behaving as consumers. So that's where the whole cycle was all about, with an example of an ordinary man and the roles that he plays. And now we are fitting that into an entire economic perspective where different individuals collectively as households and families are providing factor services or to the firms for production of goods and services, and at the same time the firms are taking those factor services to offer goods and services to the households in return. And that's how the whole economic cycle takes place. Now the challenge here is that certainly if I take in a very simplest term, though we'll talk about a lot of things in detail, in simple terms, the roles and the goals that these households and firms will play, because they're playing two different roles, they would have very conflicting and contrast goals. Like when I'm a consumer, I would always like to pay less for the product and get the best of the value. But when I am a factor of production or a producer and I'm earning resources, I would always like to get a higher return on the investment, a higher price for my product, and would like to invest or spend less on that particular thing. So I play a contrast role. For example, if I have to pay for my child's education, I would always be happy if the fee is not very high and I get the best quality at the lowest price. But when I am a professor at a university, I would always expect rise in my salary, a higher payment, and certainly for a good quality, but I would like to get highest payment for the minimum possible efforts that I would do. So I'm playing a contrast role because of the nature of the role that I'm playing in two different scenarios. So similarly, households fundamentally are being consumers because they're buying goods and services. They would always like to maximize their utility. Utility means a one satisfying measure for their satisfaction. So they would always like to get higher value for a lower cost. So the difference between value and the cost that they bear or they have to pay, they would always like to have a surplus of value over the cost. And they would always like the value to rise and the cost to go down, or to pay a lower price for the products. So they want to maximize their, their utility and satisfaction. On the other hand, the producer, because he has invested on producing goods and services and he wants the return on it, he wants his price to be higher, right? And the cost to be lower. So the price for which the producer is going to sell the product becomes the cost for the buyer. So one common thing is that the buyers and sellers, when they decide on a certain price, the seller wants the cost to be lower, cost of production to be lower than the price, and the buyer wants the value to be higher than the price. Now, these are two terms which initially may not relate, but price is a common factor. So when price is a common factor, the consumer wants to pull down the price while the seller wants to push up the price, because that's where his production and profit maximization is possible, while the consumer wants to pull down the price because he wants to increase his utility. So there is a bargain on the price. The consumer wants the prices to lower, the value to increase, while the producer wants the price to go up. Even if he wants to offer more value, there's a higher cost, so he wants to raise the price further. Now, this tug of war between buyers and sellers, the buyers trying to, or the consumers trying to pull down the price, the sellers trying to push up the price, there is a kind of conflict that happens in the economy. And since these two entities, the households and producers, are like two tires of a bicycle, they both have to be in kind of some kind of consensus, and there has to be a common mutual interest of both to be safeguarded for an economy to grow further. Because let's understand this: if firms exploit the households, if it's a buyer's seller's market and the firms charge a very high price for the products, the households, initially the firms will end up earning more profits. But what happens is when the profits increase and the households actually, on the other hand, find that they are able to, the prices are going up, they'll be able to buy less of the products. So in future, what will happen? The demand will contract. Number one. Number two, in order to meet that rising price, the households will charge a higher factor payment for their services. So again, the profits of the firms in the longer run will dilute. On the other hand, if it's a buyer's market and the consumers exploit the producers, that means they are in a position to push down the prices, there will be a dilution of profits. So initially the customers would be happy, but when there is a dilution of profits, the firms will either raise the price, which will burden the consumers, or on the other hand, they will reduce their cost of production by trying to get more work out of the people, lay off a few people out of jobs, or reducing the factor payments. So ultimately, it's again going to fall on the consumers, and in the long run, it's going to squeeze the demand. So ultimately, any of these entities, if goes ahead to exploit the other in the short run, they can reap short-term benefits, but in the long run, they being the same part of the same coin, same members of the economy, might find that both of them get affected adversely in the long run. So in order to create this balance, to stabilize the economy, to avoid one exploiting the other, we need a regulator. And that regulator is the government. So the governments are assumed to play a role of a regulator who tries to create a balance in the economy by regulating the demand, the supply, the prices, the cost, by having certain policies to ensure that the buyers and the sellers, or the firms and the households, are both evenly poised and they don't end up exploiting one another depending on the situations across sectors, and ensures that there is stability. There is growth. So the firms should get enough profit that they have the encouragement to work harder and do better and contribute to the GDP. On the other hand, the consumers should also have, should get enough that the demand is created every time they generate enough income. If firms earn profits, the households earn factor payments. When the households earn factor payments, there's a greater demand. When there's a greater demand, obviously the firms will produce more and charge more prices, and so on and so forth. People will be able to pay a higher price because they're earning more, and so on and so forth. The economy moves ahead. But in this process, as I said, there has to be some stability. Though we'll talk about problems like inflation, business cycle, and others under the broad heading of economic growth, development, and stability. But as of now, the role of the government is to ensure balance for the overall welfare of all the members of the society, because it's the same member who's on one hand playing the role of a producer, and on the other hand playing the role of a consumer. So for a mutual welfare of the society, governments are assumed to play a rational role, a sensible role as better planners and regulators. So governments can sometimes improve the outcomes. When we talk about the fundamental principles of economics, we'll actually formally understand those fundamentals through all that we have studied in a very generalized topic in today's session. So these are primarily the three entities, but we also study in an economy a fourth entity called the financial system, which is the banks, the capital markets, and all those who are kind of a system or a different kind of firms which are, rather than being into production or consumption, are into savings and investment. So these financial service providers, or the members of the financial system, like banks, the non-banking financial institutions, and the other agencies and the capital markets, they try to channelize the savings from the households. If the households don't want to become a factor of production, or become producers, I told you the other activity is investment. So they channelize their savings into bank as deposits, or into capital markets as stocks, investment in stocks, and then channelize that money and give that, further extend that to members of the industry who want that money, that corpus, to increase their production capacities, or utilize that money in establishing their infrastructure, or for capital expenditure for expanding their businesses, and so on and so forth. And these firms, out of this money, when they earn profits, they earn revenues, they pay back in form of the interest on the loans to these financial service providers, and the financial service providers provide interest to the individuals for the investments that they have made. So that's how there is again a two-way process. Individuals also can buy loans from the banks and pay them interest, and so on. The firms can also do that with the financial system. So this is the whole setup, and the governments actually are supposed to oversee the whole system. So you have the banking system, which we'll talk about in the macroeconomics. The RBI would probably look at the monetary system. The government would look at the fiscal system, and then you have the households and firms also, and everybody being governed by a government and ensuring that there is welfare of all and maximum welfare along with growth, development, and stability. So, and then in an open market, in an open economy today, in the era of globalization, these households and firms and the financial systems might also be in, and the governments also might be in transaction with the external organizations outside the country. And so you could have the governments having trade with the other countries, a bilateral sort of trade happening. There can be a household providing factor services, working abroad and getting remittances. There could be firms operating in other parts of the world and getting business out of it. There could be at the same time companies of a particular country exporting or producing and exporting goods to other countries and getting remittances in return. On the other hand, the households can be importing a lot of products from other countries and paying for those imports. So that's what you see, that the households also and the firms also can be in touch with the external sector or the foreign sector for imports, exports, and transfer payments. So that's how the whole economic system works. And that's how different entities play different roles. So the households play primarily the role of a consumer, and they work with the goal of utility maximization, creating value for themselves. The firms play the primary role of a producer, and amongst various goals, which we'll study in future, goodwill maximization, revenue maximization, profit maximization, wealth maximization, they try to maximize their profits. And the governments try to maximize growth and development for the whole economy, along with stability, and ensure welfare of all the stakeholders across the economy. And that's how different entities play different roles, and that's how they interact within an economic setup. So these were the building blocks to basic understanding of economics. And from these building blocks, I'm sure most of these principles of economics and other concepts will come out in detail, and I'll be able to elaborate on them in the subsequent sessions. So I hope this gives you a clear overview of why people do what they do, what are the different roles we play, and when we play these different roles, what are the different stakeholders in the economy, and how the whole economic system works in tandem. So to close the whole discussion, let's just sum up with a basic understanding of economics, just a basic introduction, that what is economics then all about? Is it a study about money or wealth? Is it the study about trade-offs? You have to get something, you have to give something in return, or you have to sacrifice something. Does it talk about scarcity of resources? Or is it something that talks about the problem not of just the individuals, of the whole society, of the whole country, like inflation, unemployment, budgets of the government, and so on? Or does it talk about growth, development, elimination of poverty, acceleration of growth and welfare? So all in all, if you see the whole thing at a micro level, from a micro level to a macro level, from an individual trying to optimize his satisfaction and his and earn some return on his basic investments, to a macro level, the industries, the firms collectively, and the government trying to ensure adequate wealth, ensure growth, stability, all that. Economics covers everything. So all of these above, from micro to macro level issues, are important topics involved in the study of economics. So the main objective of economic research or economic study is its ability to explain how we means different stakeholders and the country at large can optimally achieve the highest standard of living, quality of life, and welfare, which is for the whole country or the economy, which includes growth and development with stability. And in simplified terms, individuals can maximize their utility and satisfaction. The producers can maximize their wealth and profits, and the country overall can maximize its wealth, its growth, its stability and welfare. So that's what economics is all about. And if I look at the whole economy, if I take you to the previous slide, if I look at the whole setup, this is the study of economics in general. If I study it from the perspective of the government, it could be termed as the public finance. If I study from the point of view of the financial system, it can be monetary economics. If I talk about all in general, it is at a large level, at a macro level, with aggregates the firms, the industries, and households. It's macroeconomics. If I study from an individual's perspective, from a household's perspective, or, it becomes micro, or an individual firm's perspective, it becomes microeconomics. Again, that microeconomics, if it is studied particularly, not just from the perspective of household and firms, but primarily from the perspective of the firms, that how firms will decide how to deal with households, how to deal with governments, how to deal with financial system, and how to deal with the external sector. Stepping in the shoes of the firm, then this becomes an applied area of microeconomics, which is called macroeconomics. Managerial economics. So managerial economics is primarily a branch of microeconomics with a slight dosage of macro aspects to it, where the decisions are taken from the perspective of the firms and the managers for maximizing profits, wealth, and production, and so on and so forth, and getting greater, returns on investment. So from a utility maximization science that we talk about microeconomics from a household perspective, managerial economics will be more from the point of view of firms and managers. Similarly, if the same microeconomics is applied in industry, understanding production more closely, we call it industrial economics. If it is studied from the point of view of financial systems, we call it financial economics. If we involve it in this understanding of human behavior and primarily the behavior of individuals, we call it behavioral economics. So economics gets applied into any area, any field, and as an applied area. So that's the reason, and with a different nomenclature. So we have industrial economics, managerial economics, financial economics, behavioral economics, and so on and so forth. But these are all branches of micro or macro level. So managerial economics would be when we look at the whole setup remains the same. The goal of the economy, the role of the entities, the interaction remains same. But when the primary emphasis, depends on which role are you playing. So if you study from the perspective of the firm, we call it managerial economics. And when you study economics in general, you would focus both on micro and macro. When you study from the point of view of the government, you would study more of the macro perspective and the welfare economics. When you study from the perspective of individuals, you'll call it microeconomics, and so on and so forth. So coming back to it, and then, yes, when you study from the external factor, India's relation with other countries, you might study a subject called international economics. So that's how economics is not just a science of life. It is also about, it's a discipline that can apply in any area, in any context, for the purpose of improving the future for an entity, and how those entities take decisions in context of the present situation, in anticipation of the future, by using certain principles, concepts, and rationales in order to have a brighter future. That's what economics is all about. So how do you sacrifice resources in the present context? How do you allot them, manage them, allocate them, and administer them for a better future for yourselves, is what economics is all about. So thus economics is the study of how we can best utilize the resources that we have available to us for a better tomorrow. And economics is the study of how the society manages, which involves allocation, utilization, and administration of the scarce resources, and enhance their own welfare. So when the individuals or the society, when the individual firms or the industry, or when the financial system or the government, they collectively take decisions on these rational premises, we are actually understanding the application of economics in real life. So that's all for the day. I think by now you would have understood what economics is. In the next subsequent sessions, we'll talk about the actual formal definitions of economics, how has it evolved over a period of time, what are the fundamental principles, and then a lot of other topics that go into detail, and how economics assists in decision making at different levels, as individuals, as firms, as managers, as government, and as somebody who's into international business. So that's all. We'll do it for the day, and I hope you've understood the basic introduction to what economics is. Thank you. and all the very best.